Welcome to episode 3 of Second Nature. 3 episodes in the bank now, almost. I guess just 2 in the bank so far, but number 3 well on the way. My name is Dylan Bowman, joined by my co-host Aaron Lutzy. Aaron, number 3, how you doing, buddy?
I'm feeling great. I think the only thing I love more than seeing all the feedback is actually preparing for the next one and like researching everything and getting it all ready. It's like the best thing.
It truly has been really fun so far, and I think that's the early indication that we're on to something cool here. We have gotten a lot of positive feedback from our small group of early listeners here, including some heavy hitters. Lucy, share some of the feedback that we received from our listeners from the first couple episodes.
Well, Dylan, actually, the thing is, in the first episode, you called out Roa hiking, and then I went online and I saw Drake wearing Roa. So I feel like there's some really heavy hitters listening to Second Nature already, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But we did get a message from Rich Roll. He was super pumped on the shout out that we gave them and appreciated us discussing what we're doing and more appropriately what he's doing. He said, happy to elaborate with you at some point and congrats on this new format. Very cool. Pretty sweet. I mean, Rich, I think he commented when the video had like 40 views. So he was early. He's early on Second Nature, which is pretty good.
No big deal. Rich Roll, a listener.
I definitely clicked through to make sure it was the real Rich Roll. I was like, oh, no, wait, it's really him.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not just some bot account that responds to any YouTube video where he's mentioned.
I wouldn't be mad. Although, to be fair, they probably are keeping an eye out on people talking about voicing change media and doing that, but I don't care. I'm still counting. It still counts as a W for me.
Do you remember when I took that selfie with Rich Roll and texted it to you at Camp Strava a couple years ago?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely remember that. I wonder if he heard the part where I blamed being vegan on him. I hope not, but maybe.
Oh, well, I mean, I think you said so in a way that was endearing, and obviously, I'm sure that was a part of your life where your health did improve at least moderately, even if maybe you've graduated away from veganism. Rich Roll, I'm sure, improved your life in some way.
Yeah, I became an ultra runner at the same time, so we'll call it a wash.
What about Retsek, our boy from RXR Sports? He texted you too.
Yeah, we got the text. Same thing, like, thanks for the kind words. We'll give you guys the scoop, which actually he'd be an amazing interview to have on the podcast. He's probably the best agent in the outdoor industry. I mean, you look at the roster that they have, plus his voice and change media thing. This is somebody we should definitely try to get on here. I know we're just kind of going back and forth, but I'd love to have some interviews and he'd be a good one. He's definitely at the top of my list.
Yeah, 100%. I thought about that too. It's funny because actually it was last year's Camp Strava where I was chatting with Adrian Ballinger, who Jonathan represents. We were out on a morning run in Southern California, and Adrian introduced me to Jonathan that morning. And I actually have told Adrian about this whole Second Nature concept. It's been a year now since I mentioned it to him, but I'd love to have Adrian on too, because he's been a pioneer as an athlete business person. Also, he's a big mountain skier, mountaineer, and alpinist guide, traveling all over the world. He's done Everest without oxygen, etc. But he also owns a really prominent guiding business. So both Adrian and Jonathan would be great guests in the future.
I'm super down. One thing that I learned this week that we'll talk about when we get to brand product content is that I have a lot of vertical knowledge, but across the board, I just have enough information to be dangerous. And there are people that are really knowledgeable in a wider range of subjects. And I love talking to people like that and listening to them. So I'm so on board.
Yeah, well, it's good to be a generalist, but in the domain of athlete and sports marketing, you are the voice of authority. And I'm sure that'll be established as we put more of these episodes together. If you are a listener, which you are, send us some feedback. You got to go check out and follow our new Instagram account, just like our internet URL. We are secondnature.media on Instagram. We just got that account off the ground here this morning. So go smash that follow button, throw us some DMs. We're obviously open to both feedback and ideas for topics to tackle here in the show in future episodes. Anything else you want to say before we get to the docket, Aaron?
No, I'm all fired up for this episode. It's going to be a good one.
Hell yeah. Okay, so we are going to be talking about a couple of things here in today's episode. We're going to start with the state of the ski industry. There were a couple interesting stories that came out in the media recently that Aaron and I are going to discuss. Then we're going to talk about some big news that's happening in Aaron's career, both in the corporate world and in his athlete slash creator world. So Aaron will update us on that, and then we'll finish up as we always do with BPC, brand product content, where we send you off into the weekend with some cool stuff to check out. Lutzi, starting with the state of the skiing industry, let's start with the first story that you sent to me earlier in the week. The story is titled "Death to Ski Resorts?" The declining popularity of skiing. It was published on myskilessons.com. There's been a lot of conversations about the risks that climate change poses to snow sports industry, but the article basically makes the argument that it's a loss of popularity of the sport that threatens skiing even more so than climate change. Get us started on this one.
So this is a really interesting article. They showed Google searches of people searching ski, snowboard, action sports, and they showed this declining trend over the years. And this was always a conversation that we would have at Red Bull too, of like, what is popular? Like, is skiing still going to stick around? Is snowboarding still going to stick around? What about skateboarding? All this kind of stuff. What's interesting is, as marketers, you can kind of tell whatever story you want to tell, and you can find the information to back up your point. So you could point to a Google search of the term that you're after, maybe declining. But I would also challenge that of like, how often do you look up trail running on Google? How often do I look up bicycling on Google? Hardly ever. I just go to the places I know to go. So is this sort of like a red herring? Is this really the information? I have to question that, because you see some of the other data out there. For example, Palisades in Tahoe, on a busy weekend for them, they're getting 25,000 people a day in the lift line. So that doesn't sound like declining popularity to me. And there's information for both sides of the story. In this article on myskilessons.com, they talked about, oh, here are the 40 resorts that have closed over the last 20 years or whatever. And there are so many different things that could have been. It could have been mismanaged financial. It could have been climate changing or low snowpack years. There's so many elements that go into running a ski resort that people not being interested in skiing or snowboarding, I actually don't think is necessarily like the main driver of why a resort specifically would shut down. There's so many other things that could kind of drive that.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that you said, reinforcing the sort of point that you're making about potentially the flaw in this analysis. Maybe I'll tick through some of the notable stats that are contained in the article. Again, this is on myskilessons.com. A couple of things they say here is that Google searches for the word skiing have been ebbing since 2004, so the last 20 years, a total loss in search volume of more than 70%. But again, I don't picture myself just Googling skiing. I would probably Google something like ski lessons or, you know, lift tickets in Aspen, something like that. Just Googling the
Absolutely.
single word skiing, maybe that's an indication that people are more sophisticated internet users and have more intentional search queries when they go to the Google search bar. They also say that there's been a 69% decrease in searches for skis. Again, same applies to that statistic. Interest in snowboarding has fallen 82%, but again, not a super scientific data point there. And it's not, and according to this article here, it's not only relegated to snow sports, but it can be applied to both surfing and skateboarding also. So basically, they're making the argument or operating with the thesis that extreme sports are down in the global zeitgeist of action or mountain sport interested human beings. They list 4 reasons for it. So I'm going to tick through those and then we can meditate on at least one of them here together. The first one is increased medical expenses. You know, you could see that being a realistic reason why you wouldn't want to go skiing, especially as you get older. Ski injuries are freaking bad, man. Like, even when you're fit and like a solid athlete, if you just make one wrong turn, holy smokes, like you can absolutely shred your knee into pieces. Fear of injury, that's a second reasoning that they list here, kind of goes hand in hand with increased medical expenses. But the real reason that I think the ski industry could be in trouble, or and where places where criticism is potentially warranted is the cost constraints. Skiing has gotten ridiculously expensive. You're a dad. I know you've sort of taken your kids out on the hill recently. Do you have a single dollar to your name still afterwards?
You know what's crazy is we've been getting lessons for our kids, and my wife and I, we were looking like, oh, maybe we can go skiing while they're learning or whatever. It is $100 for a day pass at Mount Hood.
Dude,
So
that's
for us,
cheap. That's cheap. It's like
yeah,
275 or something at Vail. I'll look it up. Keep going.
yeah, yeah. Palisades in Tahoe, their midweek day pass is 142, and it's $203 on the weekend just for one person to ski for a day. And so we've just ended up kind of hiking around the mountain, just walking around in the snow, just waiting for them to do their thing. I haven't skied at all this season because, yeah, I'm putting all the resources into the kids at this point. It's really expensive. On top of that, the amount of people that are also out there skiing is sort of a deterrent. I don't know if that's number 4 on the list, but I guess it sort of runs counter to the argument that they're having on this website. But the amount of people that are out there, like I was telling you, 25,000 people at Palisades, that's a ski resort that has a single road going in and out of it. That
Yeah.
is miserable. I would not want to ski somewhere with 24,999 other people, especially if I had to pay $203 to do that. You get like 2 runs in.
We should probably talk about overcrowding of a lot of different outdoor destinations because I actually recorded a podcast today for my other show, the Free Trail Podcast with Carl Meltzer, and he had just moved from Salt Lake City to Ridgway, Colorado, which is a remote town in the San Juan Mountains, a really cool sort of small mountain community, and he basically referenced the overcrowding of Salt Lake and his inability to even just go park at a trailhead is one of the reasons why he left. But back to the ski thing, I just pulled up on a Reddit post about contemporary 1 day lift ticket prices at some of the name brand ski resorts. So let me just tick through some of these here really quick, and then we can go a little bit deeper on the expense of actually just trying to be good at this sport and what that means for skiing in general. Vail Resorts, $299 to go skiing for a day. Steamboat Springs, also $299. Beaver Creek, also $299. Breckenridge, $279. Keystone, $269. Copper Mountain, $259. Winter Park, $259. Aspen Snowmass, $244. Arapahoe Basin, $189. And Loveland Ski Area, $149. These are the mountains that I grew up skiing, Lutzi. And it's funny because I grew up in a normal middle class house. I've been skiing since before I have memories. In fact, that was the sport I should have gone pro in, Lutzi. I was a better skier than anything else growing up. And I grew up going to these mountains. And when I was a kid, you could get a season pass for what they're charging for a single day lift ticket now. It's gotten to the point where skiing truly is a white collar sport, like a very elitist sport. And going deeper on the argument that this article is making, that is something that does pose, I think, a legit threat to the ski industry as a whole. Obviously, these mountains, it's a hard operation. And in a second, we're going to get to some of the examples of how hard it can be to run a ski resort in the modern day. And I'm sure they have to look out for their margins. They have to, in a lot of cases, create artificial snow. They're employing a ton of people. But the lift tickets now, if you're a normal middle class person like my family was, it's incredible. It's cost prohibitive to teach your kids how to ski in the same way my parents taught me how to ski. The other thing is it takes skiing multiple times a season for many years to get competent with your skills. And so it's not only like, oh, hey, let's shell out $1,000 for the family to go skiing one day. And then like everybody's going to have this new skill. It's like, no, it's going to take thousands of dollars a year for multiple years in order to feel like you can navigate your way down a mountain safely and competently. So I think that does pose a legitimate threat to the industry.
Yeah, I don't know how they solve for that. I mean, a season pass at Palisades is $1,696, or you can get the Icon Pass for $1,249. How do you solve for that when you're trying to expand the amount of people that are going in? Or maybe that's why it's so expensive. They don't want to have 25,000 people showing up every single time, and they're just going to keep jacking the price up until they get to a more reasonable number of people. I don't know. Like, What's the solution?
Yeah, I don't know, and I think this is why we've seen so much consolidation. Obviously, Vail Resorts has become the behemoth resort operator. Maybe I'll pull up their portfolio and we can look at some of the mountains that they do operate, and they've developed, like, kind of a tough reputation in the ski community because of the fact that there's at least a perception that they they buy up these resorts and then they squeeze every dollar of profit out of it without at least a commensurate level of reinvestment into the communities. At least that's, I mean, I'm not stating a fact. I'm stating, at least how some people are perceiving them. But then also there's Altera, which owns, I think, Mammoth Mountain, and I think and other resorts, and I think they're viewed more positively. But I think what I'm trying to say is that the operation of these mountains is not easy. And so in those types of business environments, it makes sense to consolidate the industry, right? To bring a lot of the resorts together, to find economies of scale, to find efficiencies with your operation. And that's why Vail Resorts has become this massive publicly traded entity that operates these ski resorts all over the world.
That seems to be the two existing models where you can either join a big conglomerate like Vail, or you can offer an icon pass situation where you can kind of spread the money across a bunch of different resorts. Another interesting thing related to this, they just launched something called the Loam Pass, which is now the mountain bike version of the Icon Pass. So there's a bunch of mountain bike resorts that are kind of following suit where they've all kind of joined together. You get this one pass and then you can go to all these spots. We'll see how this goes.
Holy smokes. So, yeah, I think as skiing has grown over the course of the last several decades, it has become, I think, less and less approachable from normal people. And therefore, it has become a moment where revisiting the business model from the ground up has been something that at least a certain creative person has taken on. Are you ready to get to that second story before about
Yeah.
Reed Hastings?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So, Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, has bought a controlling interest in Powder Mountain. He did so, I think, a couple of years ago at this point, but the New York Times published an article about that, that whole deal and what his intentions are with this ski resort and how he's changing the model of ski resort operation. Lucy, you want to get us started on this?
So Powder Resort is outside of Ogden, Utah, and it was previously owned by the Summit Group. So you may or may not be familiar with Summit at Sea or the Summit series, which is kind of like a millennial speaking series where they bring in Richard Branson to talk to a bunch of millennials and they do different events, kind of one-off things. They actually got investment and bought Powder Mountain in 2013 for $40 million. And they had a very similar idea to Reed Hastings, where they were going to sell a bunch of real estate on the mountain to kind of subsidize the cost of this resort. Powder Mountain is not the number one, like best terrain, most epic spot. It's actually a pretty quiet resort as far as all like the Salt Lake and Park City resorts go. And it had run into a bunch of financial situations. Reed Hastings moved to that area a couple years ago, loved skiing at Powder, saw that Powder was in a pretty dark spot financially, and sort of came in to help them out. So, there's always three sides to every story. But Reed's view and the way that he posted about it was that he was coming to kind of help them out, help them get on solid footing. And looking at the letter that he kind of sent out, it did look like he was going to make some really important improvements to the place, fixing up certain stuff, putting in some new lifts. But then with that, also, there's a whole element that was going to make parts of Powder Mountain completely private. And so, just like how the Summit crew had planned to do, they were going to sell off, or he is planning to sell off parts of the land, parcels at like starting at 2 million, I think. And if you live there or you own property there, you have access to specific parts of Powder Mountain. There's another mention in the New York Times article where you could pay somewhere between 30 and 100K to also get access to this. So yeah, he's serving the high end of the ski industry, the extra white collar, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah. So maybe we'll come around to, does this make skiing even more elitist? But I do think it's interesting to just contemplate the reasoning behind this. And maybe it does going back to what we mentioned at the end of last week's episode, like taking a competent person from a totally different industry and plugging them into an industry that is struggling or in need of reinvention. This could be an example of that with Reed Hastings trying out this new business model. Reading a quick excerpt from the New York Times article, it says, not long after he purchased Powder Mountain, he announced that he was adopting a business model never before tried in the ski industry. He would make 2,000 acres of the mountain terrain private, accessible only to people who owned homes in an enclave atop the mountain and who paid a membership fee expected to run between $30,000 and $100,000 a year. The rest of the ski area would remain open to the public, underwritten by the private operation. So interesting, right? And if you think about Reed's experience at Netflix, he's basically adopting a subscription model for his ski mountain, although it's not $15.99 a month, it's $30,000 to $100,000 a year.
You just add a couple zeros. Same. You're good.
So
That
so again, coming back to the article here, he makes the argument, maybe I can pull up this quote too, but he basically is saying that like going boutique and premium is his idea of what these struggling mountains need to do in order to stay independent. And to your point, the previous owner could have easily sold this mountain to Avail Resorts or an Alterra, and it would have no longer been independent. It would have become part of a much larger organization that owns many of these properties around the world. It seems to me, it feels important to him to keep Powder Mountain independent. How do you keep it independent though and create something that has margins? He says in the article also that this is not a charitable exercise. He does give a lot away philanthropically, but he views Powder Mountain as something where he needs to figure out the business model so that it can stand on its own. Harder than it sounds, I'm sure. And this new business model, he obviously thinks is the way to get there.
the thing is though, the Summit guys did try to do the exact same model. Maybe not exact same, but they tried a similar model. And as far as I can tell, only one property was bought and built on since 2013. So I mean, what is the interest? Like, how bad do you love skiing that you're going to move to like an obscure part of the Park City, Salt Lake area and ski on not the best mountain, but you do get the benefit of not being in a crowded lift line? Is that worth $2 million plus an extra 100K a year? You have to really love skiing. But the people making that decision, probably not that big of a deal for them. But I can't imagine there's enough people to keep a ski resort running.
Yeah, I wonder how many of these 30 to $100,000 a year subscriptions they need to sell in order to become profitable, cash flow positive.
It's really interesting. Well, the other thing too is that Powder Mountain actually does have mountain bike trails. And so in the discussion of becoming profitable from a resort standpoint, one of the reasons why it's hard to keep a winter resort open is that you're not open for half the year because there's no snow on the mountain. And so places like Whistler actually, I believe, are even more profitable during the summer with all the mountain bike visits that people are coming through to do and all the events that they can host and all this other stuff. So there are a lot of resorts that have actually balanced out their business model by having summer activities. Up here on Mount Hood, you can actually still ski and snowboard pretty much year round. But places like Whistler and a bunch of places in Colorado, they all have full on mountain bike trails set up there. And I know that Powder has that as well. I'd be really curious to see which one wins out in the end. Summer activity on the mountain versus private subscription model, or both. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe this is something we can talk about in a future episode too, but a lot of these resort destinations do need to confront the reality of climate change and therefore invest in activities like trail running and mountain biking, to domains that you and I spend our entire lives within. In the New York Times article, also they talk about the Yellowstone Club, with which runs a similar operation. They've been around for a long time up in Montana, and again, this is an example of going hyper boutique, hyper premium, and serving the wealthiest clientele in the world. But they run a similar model in that with Powder Mountain, they're making a certain section of the mountain only available to the high paying members who either own real estate or who have purchased this high dollar subscription, similar with the Yellowstone Club. I can't remember. I think it's Big Sky Resort that they have access to, but that there's a private ski area for the Yellowstone Club. And here at Mountain, it says they're also building a 40,000 square foot lodge that will serve as an afternoon and evening hub for members and feature a state of the art spa. I would buy a membership. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. If I had 100K to spend a year on just a ski membership, I think I may become either a Yellowstone Club member or a Powder Mountain member. What do you think, Lucy?
I'm just going to add it to our goals for Second Nature to become influential enough that they have to bring us out to experience it.
We'll go buy one of those plots of real estate out there and set up Second Nature World Headquarters, and then we'll just be shredding all winter, and then we'll break the bikes out and the trail running shoes in the summer, and we'll
This
record podcasts.
sounds pretty good, actually. Reed, give us a call. We'll sort you out.
Come on, Reed. I'd like to learn more about the Yellowstone Club. Like, I think this is one of those things where we could do a 5-minute deep dive on the podcast in the future of just like the history of the Yellowstone Club and the membership and how the business model works, because I've heard that it is like a celebrity clientele. Everybody who skis there they're escaping the paparazzi, more or less. It's not just somebody like Reed Hastings, who is obviously wealthy, but if you saw him in the line in the cafeteria for lunch on the ski hill, you wouldn't recognize him. Anyway.
That's true. That's true. Well, you think about that too. So to get to Montana from Hollywood, let's say, you're going to have to take a handful of flights, or it's kind of an extended trip. But to get there from or to go back and forth from Salt Lake to LA, it's not too bad. So maybe Reed's also playing off that, like, hey, it's closer. It's he's going to offer something more. That's the thing. It has to be a better offer than what they could have gotten at Yellowstone. And Big Sky Resort, Montana, it's beautiful. It's epic terrain. Powder is not the most, I mean, it's a great resort, but it's not the same thing as Big Sky. And I just wonder, is it enough of a draw? If Summit couldn't get the job done, selling off parcels of land, what is Reed doing differently? And I'm sure he's thought about this, but what is he doing differently to make this an offer that people can't refuse?
It's like Sean Feeney in BPC last week, who came from the banking world and now is crushing it in restaurants. Reed Hastings comes from the media and entertainment world. Let's see if he can crush it in the ski industry. Before we move on, Aaron, maybe we can tie this back to the communities that we know a little bit more about, that being trail running and mountain biking. I think we could probably draw some parallels with what's going on in the ski industry here. Maybe I'll just get us started. It feels to me that trail running, obviously a much more accessible sport in terms of the startup cost and the price to, participate on a consistent basis. So it could be that trail running maybe benefits from the inaccessibility in some cases and the inaffordability of skiing, and a lot of people who are mountain sport curious, who just like to be outside and push themselves in beautiful places. Maybe we'll see more participation of skiers translate over to running. Obviously, also there's this phenomenon in professional trail running, especially, and it's mostly geographically centralized in Europe, although a lot of the North American athletes have been influenced in that they're doing a lot of the ski mountaineering races, and this uphill alpine touring phenomenon has become wildly popular. In fact, that's supposedly one of the fastest growing outdoor sports in the world, is just uphill skiing on resorts and in the backcountry. And that skill and fitness obviously translates to trail running. So in a lot of cases, the trail runners will be ski mountaineers in the winter and then trail runners in the summertime. So there is sort of a coming together of the two sports in some ways. What about mountain biking? Like, because I could see something similar happening in the mountain bike community, where it is getting more and more expensive to afford the equipment necessary to participate.
Yeah, it's getting pretty expensive, and probably similar things seem to be happening across the board. I think mountain biking got hit probably the hardest in terms of like holding a ton of inventory and everybody being in a pretty tough spot, like we kind of covered last week on the pod. I think that when they do develop new resorts like this one, they definitely have to think now about what they're doing in the summer, and that benefits mountain biking. It gives additional opportunities to open it up. A lot of the people that I'm seeing in mountain biking, like in the comments of my mountain bike videos and stuff like that, are actually a bit older. I'm not seeing as many young kids riding mountain bike. I'm seeing people now that they're like old enough to be able to afford these bikes, because a mountain bike now, to get a good one, I mean, it's like 7,500 bucks, 1,200 or $12,000 is like the range for the
It's like
proper
what I was
ones.
saying about growing up as a skier and buying a season pass for a few $100. I'm sure when you were
Mhm.
coming up as a kid, when you got your first mountain bike, those things probably cost like 500 bones.
Yeah,
That won't
yeah.
get you a
And
freaking seat post today.
that won't even get the battery for your e-bike. Um, but it's interesting because you have people who are older who can't afford the bikes who are getting into the sport and want to go to these places. So where it used to be, kind of the scrappy kids that were mowing lawns to be able to afford a bike, they're kind of out, and the people who are in are people that have just retired or are, solid in their careers and can afford to spend the money and get into the sport and could afford to go to a resort and ride bikes. So it's really interesting to see this kind of shift of who's in, who's out. And yeah, it could actually work out for a place like this. But ultimately, all these resorts have to have an answer for the summer because you can't just do all this stuff in the winter and sit for 6 months anymore.
Yeah. Well, again, it does seem that skier days are not necessarily declining, at least not significantly. So it feels that the sport is still on firm footing. I do hope that more people like me can experience the joys of gliding downhill, even if they come from sort of normal families, because that is getting harder and harder. But it's a interesting conversation. I'm sure something that we can revisit in the future of just what's going on, what's the dynamic and ownership in a lot of these mountains, how hard is it to stay independent, can Reed Hastings thread the needle here at Powder Mountain? Anything else before we move on, Aaron?
What might be really interesting is what happens if this works? What if Reed is successful? Does he then go and buy up a bunch of other struggling mountains,
Yeah.
implement the same model, and then you've got the Icon Pass setup where you can go to any of the Reed Hastings mountains and shred?
You know, it makes me also want to do a deep dive on Aspen Snowmass as an entity too, because they are still independent and privately owned by a single family. And they don't only own the four ski resorts in the Aspen area, but they own a bunch of hotels. And they've done so much to create a powerful mountain community. One of the other things that's happening in a lot of these places, and that I think a lot of the locals who live around Powder Mountain are worried about, is that the people who have tried to make lives and careers there and raise families there may get pushed out by people who are second homeowners or who want an Airbnb to rent out at some astronomical prices. In Aspen, they've done a really great job of investing in employee housing, of creating a lottery system where several of my friends have been able to buy homes in the Roaring Fork Valley that would otherwise be totally unaffordable, because they have an affordable housing program where you can actually buy in, and then there's sort of a cap as to how much your property can appreciate. But for people who are working in the communities, they need to be able to live there too. And that's becoming increasingly hard. And I know that all these ski resort destinations are struggling with this housing availability for the local community who make the economy work, that work in the service industry, et cetera. So there's a lot of complex issues surrounding, the inflation of just going and recreating in mountain destinations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, that'll be a good topic to come back to in a future episode. Moving on to our second topic here today, our boy Aaron Lutzi's got some big news. We are celebrating a milestone. Aaron, tell us about it.
Oh, it's a milestone. It's like a double milestone. So tomorrow is going to be my last day in corporate America. I quit my job. Simultaneously, my YouTube channel, by the math, should break 100,000 subscribers to get the silver play button also tomorrow. So the universe has spoken. This is like a huge moment all coming together in one
I
day.
mean,
It's
that is
insane.
crazy that it's happening in all likelihood on the same day.
Bonkers. Honestly, crazy. It's funny, right? It's been 4 years of just consistently grinding away to have this sort of overnight success moment happen.
All
Um,
right. So let's take the two things independently. Do you want to talk about what you were doing in the corporate world?
Nah.
Nah, okay.
Let's get to the good stuff.
Okay, all right. So, tell us about it. I mean, you have it on the podcast here. You haven't talked about Super Rider. So tell the people what Super Rider is and, what gave you the confidence to go all in on it.
So Super Rider is basically a mountain bike tutorial channel. I break down complex bike skills into easy to learn techniques that you can quickly apply to your riding. So my background as a bike rider is this really obscure style of riding called trials, which is like if you see somebody rock climbing on a bike where they're hopping around and doing all that stuff, that's where I started. And the thing about doing that is that to be able to do that originally, you have to take a complex skill and break it into a million parts, learn each one of those pieces, and then put it back together. And then voila, you can do it. And what's great is that you get this crazy high level of bike control in the process. And that applies to every other bike that you're ever going to ride in the future. But the thing is, trials is a really obscure and difficult sport. And people that see it are just overwhelmed. And the level of technology in the bikes now is just wild. It doesn't look like a bicycle anymore. My competition trials bike doesn't even have a seat on it because it's like basically a stick connecting two tires. So that doesn't necessarily translate to a wide audience of people that just want to learn the basics of mountain biking. And where I've gone with Super Rider is to make all of that stuff available, but on a proper mountain bike that looks like the bike that everybody rides. And that's been a big part of the journey of the channel. So I started 4 years ago with this channel during the pandemic. I just wanted to like blow the dust off of my riding because I hadn't ridden in a while. And I was talking to my friend Eric Porter, and he was like, "Oh, you used to make mountain bike videos. You should do it again. Like, do YouTube. It'd be sick." And you know me, like I can't just do a thing. I gotta fully lock in, learn everything there is, optimize, iterate, whatever. And that's exactly what happened over the last 4 years. I got better and better, and I learned as much as I possibly can. And the thing that's the most interesting, I think, about this entire journey is that while I was working on building up a YouTube channel and doing bike stuff, I learned so many lessons that apply everywhere else, including the job that I'm about to leave. I don't think I would have gotten that job, or more appropriately, I don't think I would have been as useful in that job if I hadn't done the YouTube thing on the side the entire time, because everything I learned within the YouTube world actually applied 100% to what I did in this last job.
Tell us the
It's wild.
lessons, bro. I know
All right.
you. I know you well enough to know that you've got these lessons written down. Bestow that knowledge on the listenership here.
Well, since you asked, I did. Okay, I have 5 lessons. I tried to kind of whittle this down into 5 points that will hopefully be useful, even if you don't want to start a YouTube channel, and even if you don't want to be a professional mountain biker. I feel like these apply across everything. So the first thing, my first lesson is that no one cares, and you can do anything you want. So, and the people who do care, they're not going to show up until you're successful. And at that point, it's important to remember that even the worst people in the world have access to the internet. But so much of what we do, the thing that's limiting us is actually this idea that someone else is going to care about it. And in almost every case, no one cares, like at all. And that is frustrating at first when you're building up a channel and trying to get people to
Like,
care.
please
But it
care, for God's sakes.
but it's also kind of freeing. Like you can do anything you want, and if it fails, nobody cares. And if it succeeds, actually nobody cares either. And even now, like, I'm sure you can appreciate the effort that I put into this, but I don't think that many people really care that I got to this milestone because it doesn't mean anything to them.
I
They don't
care.
know.
I care, Lucy.
Okay, so the first one is no one cares. You can
Basically,
do
what you're
anything
saying
you
is
want.
like, don't be super self conscious. Just get started. It doesn't have to
Absolutely.
be perfect.
Yeah. Think about this. If we had just waited until we had everything set for the podcast versus we just started and here we are, 3 episodes
Three
in.
episodes, two and a half
Rich
deep.
Roll is already watching our stuff. We're doing something right.
Rich Roll cares. All right, what's number two?
That's all I need. Okay. Number 2, behavior precedes success. So I had process in place, right? Every day I would wake up at 5 o'clock. I would go to a warehouse that I've rented out, just a little guy, and I had a scheduled release. Every week I would come out with at least one video every Saturday on my channel, like clockwork. There's always a video going on. And I think having this consistent drumbeat of what you're doing and why you're doing, it made it so that I could iterate appropriately, but it also made it so that I didn't waste a lot of emotional energy on each one because there was always going to be a next one and I knew exactly what I needed to do. And
Mm.
by having that schedule, it kind of helped me do that. But behavior precedes success is just such a important thing. You think about all these long-term things you can be doing. Like in our first newsletter, I put that Simon Sinek book, The Infinite Game, right? And so the infinite game is all about like, well, what if you never stopped doing this thing and you just kept doing it? Where would it go? Exactly that. Like, what are the behaviors that you need to put in? You and I get together once a week and record a podcast every single week. I put out a YouTube video every single week. Over time, these things will mean something. It'll either be a giant learning experience or, there'll be a podcast or a video at the end of it. One of the other things that I did that's sort of related to this is I got this thing called the 5-year journal. And each page in this book is like March 1st, March 2nd. And then there's like 5 sections in it. And then you write the year and you write a couple lines. And specific to my channel, I would write what the subscribers were. And then I would write a couple notes about what happened that day on the channel or what I was working on or whatever. And even though I'm doing this behavior every day, it was also really great for me in sort of a mental aspect to be able to look back a couple years and say, where was I at this point this year?
Uh,
How are things going? Checking in with myself to say like how far I've come or what I was thinking about 2 years ago versus what I'm thinking about now was such a cool mental exercise that I wasn't a journaler. I wasn't a writer before any of this stuff, but that one thing was so huge. And anybody who's trying to tackle literally anything, the 5-year journal is such an incredible hack. It's on Amazon. You can pick it up or whatever.
It's
But
so funny. We do this a lot too, where we just laugh and shake our heads at the early iterations of the things that we did at Free Trail. And for us, when you're bogged down in the day-to-day operation, you can never feel like you're making progress until you do zoom out and take that 5-year vision and just chuckle at how much of an idiot you were in the early days. But then you come back to the realization that nobody cares. You had to start, and now here you are, and hopefully more people are caring.
what's that? There's a quote that goes something like, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 5.
I think
And
that's
this journey,
attributed to Bill Gates.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this journal is all about. It's crazy to see like the first lines being like a couple hundred subscribers, and then you go down a couple years and it's 100,000 pretty soon,
Holy shit.
bonkers.
Other
Okay.
lessons.
Number 3, uh, is it a 2 out of 10 opportunity getting a 10 out of 10 effort? Have you heard this one?
No, tell me.
This was just on another podcast, but the idea is basically like you're putting 10 out of 10 effort into something. You're going all in.
Uh-huh.
But is the opportunity also a 10 out of 10 or is it a 2 out of 10? And for me on the channel, I ended up niching up instead of niching down. And that was a lesson that I learned from listening to the community that was coming into my videos.
Mm.
I was at a festival and somebody came up to me and was like, "Oh, I love your channel, I love your stuff." And I was like, "Oh, what kind of trials bike do you have?" And the guy looked at me, he's like, "No, I just do it on a mountain bike." And then through the weekend at that festival, same exact thing. "Oh, I just do your stuff on a mountain bike." And so I realized that I was way too niche and that I needed to expand and adapt my stuff to a wider audience, to a bigger total addressable market. That the thing that I was doing, all respect to my trials homies, but the thing that I was doing was kind of a 2 out of 10 opportunity. There
Mm.
wasn't enough people there to really make this thing viable. There aren't maybe 100,000 people out there that even care about this really obscure sport, but there's millions of people that mountain bike. So are you putting a 10 out of 10 effort into something that's an opportunity that's maybe 2 out of 10 on the
Yeah,
scale?
don't they, I think they call that like a power law, right? Of like the 20% of stuff that creates 80% of the upside in your
Yep,
business.
absolutely, absolutely. That was a huge
That's
one for
another good
me.
one.
Let's see. This next one is sort of related to the behavior thing, but it's this idea of long-term consistency always beats short-term intensity. So instead of just going super hard for a couple weeks, which is exactly what I see people do on YouTube, they put like 5 videos out and they're like, it didn't work. I have to just kind of laugh because I'm like, it took me like 100 videos to even see anything. If you look at the first year on my data analytics for YouTube, it's basically a flat line, and then it picks up, and it picks up a little bit more, a little bit more, all long-term consistency. And that's 100% where that journal came in, because you can't see it in the moment. Even now, I don't feel like it's really going great, but when I scan back a couple years, I'm like, oh, okay, things are definitely working.
Yeah.
It's
It's not a sprint, it's an ultra marathon. The
absolutely.
fifth and
Okay,
final lesson.
fifth and final, views and subscribers do not translate to anything unless they're part of a community. And there's a lot of different thoughts I have on this, but the community is actually the value, not a video that only got, they got a million people that watched it. Like, that doesn't actually mean anything. But if you had a million people in a community that were always there, that were engaging with you on social, that were reading your newsletter, that would come to your live event, would listen to your podcast, would be locked in with you directly, that's where the real value is. And it was so easy to get hung up on like views originally. This goes sort of back to that idea of the 1,000 true fans, but a lot of people when they're getting into content stuff are so focused on stuff getting views, when realistically you're actually building up this community of people that genuinely care about what you have to say and about what you're sharing and all these different things. And that's where the real value is. And it doesn't matter how many subscribers you have, it doesn't matter how many views you have. It's really about the people that are part of that community, and that number is always going to be smaller, but that's where the real power is.
You are the content whisperer for pro athletes, and you've been so ahead of the curve on this community point, especially. I think eventually we'll be needing to create some tutorials about how people in the outdoor action and endurance sport community can leverage these 5 lessons to create their own 100,000 person subscriber channel. But we'll save that for when we have a little bit more time on our hands.
Actually, if you go to the Second Nature YouTube channel, there's a bunch of tutorials
Yeah.
that I left on there. So knock yourself out.
There are a few videos up there. There are a few videos up there. Take advantage of free knowledge from Aaron Lutzi. Maybe before we move on to our closing segment, tell us a little bit about the anxiety. Let's get real. Tell us about
Yeah.
the anxiety inherent in leaving a cushy corporate job to be a YouTuber, content creator, athlete.
I mean, this is probably where I
You
could
got
use
3
your
kids,
help.
bro. You got 3
Yeah.
kids.
This is definitely where I think I could use some insight from you.
Yeah.
I haven't been on the other side of the table necessarily when it comes to having to basically survive on the content and stuff. Now, I'm not starting from zero. Obviously, I've got my newsletter for Super Rider. I've got the YouTube channel. The Instagram's about to cross 50K. Like, there's definitely some signs of success, but also like the mountain bike industry right now is in a pretty bad place. So
Mm.
if I'm realistic about my chances of survival, it's probably not going to be due to a lot of mountain bike stuff, if I had to guess, at least in the first year. I don't necessarily expect to have a lot of sponsorship as it is traditionally, but where I'm looking at stuff is, consulting work, developing content for other brands. Content is such an important element for everyone, not just athletes, but for brands as well. And they're looking for things like this. So that's going to be, I think, where I'm going to do the most stuff. But you know what? Also, like, I'm not going to stress out about it for a little bit. I'm going to try to make it a couple months before I start to really freak out. I need like a little break, went right from Red Bull, right to Aura, right to Abbott. I never took any time in between anything. And so I feel like I'm due to just have like a deep breath for, like a day or two.
You know what I think would be relevant here before we close it down with BPC, Lutzi? Do you want to share what Chris Warden said to you? Because I think it's relevant to the whole spirit that we're trying to create here with Second Nature. And I think it's obviously really important to this big leap of faith you're taking.
Yeah. Chris said, jump and the net will appear. And it's really interesting how that's sort of been happening. I haven't really announced that I'm leaving my job anywhere, really. And already, I'm starting to get a couple emails here, a couple messages here, a couple projects popping up here. And it's starting to give me some hope that that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm more of the mindset of like, the harder I work, the luckier I get. So this is a really big trust the universe moment for me, I guess. And I know it's going to work out, and we always kind of figure our way out. I was talking to another creator, this guy Dustin Klein, and I was telling him about everything, and he's like, look back at your life and all the times where things just kind of magically worked out for you. That's exactly what's going to happen again. And I was like, yeah, I don't know.
It
But I
sounds good in
gotta,
theory, doesn't it?
yeah, you gotta trust the universe on this stuff, like we're capable at the things that we do. We have a lot of knowledge and value, and there are people out there that I think are going to benefit from that. And it's just a matter of finding those people and bringing value to them. And I feel like this is a good way to start.
Yeah. The other thing that Chris said to you though was that basically, dude, you got one shot at this life here. You're 44 years old now. You got to build your own thing eventually. No better time to start than now. And there's so much value in creating, owning, and building your own thing. And you are not even in the first inning. I mean, you've built this incredible platform. Now you just get to be all in and fully committed to it, not just have it be a side hustle.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to make this my 100% focus and just lock in on it.
So
Like
cool,
if I
man. And
if I could do this at
there's so much I have learned from, I've been in that captain seat for the last 3 years after leaving my cushy corporate job and nuking my pro athletic career to build my business. And I'd be happy to walk you through some of those war stories. Actually, all the war stories, but maybe we can share them publicly here on the
let's do it.
podcast in the
Let's do it.
future. But I'm proud of you, man, and you deserve nothing but success. And I'm sure you jumped, and the net will appear, and the community will come to your back. So cool, man. Should we close it out with BPC?
Let's do it. I got 2 today, so
All
however
right,
you want to
so
do it.
so let me just tee it up. Brand product content. If you're new to the show, this is how we close it down every week. Basically, we choose one thing each from among those 3 categories: a cool brand, a cool product, or a cool piece of content that we noticed during the week to send you off into the weekend with a little bit of homework or something to check out. You want to get us started, or should I?
I'll do my more straightforward content one, then I'll pass it to you, and then I'll bring us home with something pretty obscure.
Okay, all right. You get us started then.
Okay. The number 1 book on Amazon in the bicycle category right now is called Live to Ride, and it's written by Peter Flax, who, Dylan, you might know. He's the
I
head
follow
of
him
the
on
Red,
Twitter.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
he
Red
runs Red
Bulletin.
Bulletin. Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he's so into the bike world. Like that's where he came from. He was running bicycling for a long time. He's always been. When he first came to Red Bull, I was so fired up because I had
Dude,
like
talk about
another.
somebody we need to have on the pod. We got to get
He'd be,
him on.
he'd be a good one for sure.
Oh.
So he wrote this book called Live to Ride, and it's really like this deep knowledge of the bike world. It's got a little bit of barbarian days in it. It's got a little bit of like just everything about bicycling. And when I was reading it, you know me, like I'm so into bikes, and I realized that I have a very vertical amount of knowledge when it comes to biking. And Peter has this depth across all these different disciplines of biking. So I learned a ton of stuff about everything. And then I'm about halfway through it right now, but I'm absolutely loving this book. It looks kind of like a coffee table book, but it reads like a barbarian days. Like I can't put this book down. Highly recommended. Peter Flax, Live to Ride,
Did you say that this is number 1 on Amazon
for the
for
bike
bikes? I was
category.
like,
But
God,
yeah, yeah.
he's taken down like James Clear. No, I guess
I don't.
not. That's cool. I'm gonna look it up. Yeah, I follow Peter on Twitter, but I don't know him personally. But I do. I enjoy his posts, and I know he's deep in the bike world. All right, cool.
Awesome.
So I'll give you mine, and then you can close us down. So my brand product content for this week is both a brand and a product. Do you know Rabbit, the brand Rabbit in running?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Rabbit was started by Monica DeVries and her co-founder, whose name is Jill. I can't remember her last name. Sorry, Jill. But Monica DeVries is somebody who I look up to massively in the running space. And Rabbit has been this cool boutique apparel brand for probably the last 7 or 8 years since they were founded. And Monica has been a long time running industry, uh, you know, participant or just a professional in the space. And she also owns a retail outlet in Santa Barbara, the Santa Barbara Running Company. And they started this apparel brand that just really took off in the last like 5 or 6 years. They have broad distribution at a bunch of different retailers. And Monica is just like such a savvy operator. And she's been on my other podcast a couple of times. And by the time this episode of Second Nature comes out, we will have a video up on the Free Trail YouTube channel of an interview that I did with her at the running event in Austin, Texas last December, which is sort of like the major running industry trade show. And Monica there revealed to us at Free Trail under embargo that they were releasing a footwear product.
Ooh,
So
okay.
Rabbit is just launching, it was just announced today, a product called the Dream Chaser. What a freaking perfect name. And
Huh.
Monica's post about it on LinkedIn. I'll share it in the show notes. Makes it clear that this has been a dream of hers forever, was to offer a footwear product. And there's a couple of things that I think are interesting here for our listeners to contemplate. Number one, small brand going from apparel to footwear, hard thing to do, expensive. And this shoe actually looks super nice. I've never put it on, but got to see it at the running event last year. And it actually has like some real innovation to it. Like it's engineered in such a way that it's not just like a, hey, let's get something with our brand manufactured and put it into the marketplace and see what happens. Like they did this in a really intentional way. And knowing and respecting Monica in the way that I do, I have a feeling they're going to be very successful. But the other thing that I was going to mention about this that I think is unique is I had a dinner at the running event also with the CEO of a different apparel brand, and he was talking to me. I asked him, hey, when are you going to launch a footwear product? He's like, not going to do it, man, because as soon as we do, we basically go to war with all the big dogs in the market, right? Like, and Rabbit had been doing some contract apparel work with Hoka in the past, because they're both sort of neighbors there in Santa Barbara. I'm sure they still have a cordial relationship, but it is an interesting thing to just think about in the competitive landscape of like, okay, well, does this now change how Rabbit's perceived by the big players in the market? Because they have been successful. So now are the bigger brands going to be looking over their shoulder at this upstart Rabbit with a lot of momentum now coming into the footwear category? And it's funny too, because I also at that same dinner was chatting with Michael Brandt, the CEO of HVMN Ketone IQ, and he made the point, yeah, we get asked all the time when we're going to make a ketone shot with carbs in it. And he's like, we're not going to do it because then we immediately go to war with Morton and Goo and Cliff Bar, et cetera. And so I just thought that was an interesting attitude to take. It's like, again, another theme that's come up on the show multiple times, like when to go niche, when to go broad, when to like, how do you build your business? Like with Lululemon, they also were going from apparel into footwear. And so, anyway, I just wanted to give a shout out to Rabbit and to Monica while also just bringing up the broader implications of it, because I'm sure they're going to be successful, knowing Monica and just seeing how the brand has operated in the last several years. So, a big shout out and congratulations to them. Again, you can find a video to go deeper on this specific product over on the Free Trail YouTube channel by the time this podcast goes up on Second Nature. But that's my BPC for this week. Rabbit running, the Dream Chaser, a new footwear product.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I have some of their jerseys and stuff. They're
It's
really
good
cool.
product. Yeah,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
apparel's super nice.
Yeah. Yeah. That's in my heavy rotation. So that's cool. That's awesome.
Close us
Okay,
down.
I'm gonna bring us home with something really obscure. You know I love getting weird with these BPCs, and this is no different. Are you familiar with someone by the name of Alejandro Jodorowsky?
No.
Excellent. I wouldn't expect you to. He's a Chilean avant-garde filmmaker. Okay. But he did one of the most incredible and impactful things in all of culture. Okay. And I'm gonna bring this all together at some point, but his contribution to the world, he was going to make a movie in the 70s, might have been late 60s even. He had the original rights to make the movie Dune. Okay, this is before the David Lynch version. This like crazy avant-garde filmmaker, Salvador Dali was going to be in it, Pink Floyd was going to do the music for it, and he brought together all these creatives, all these artists, designers, special effects people, all this stuff. And he had this grand vision. Dune was going to be 14 hours long. It was this crazy thing. I think Mick Jagger was going to be in the movie as well. Okay. All of this sounds really crazy. But what happened is that the project, after a couple of years, imploded. And all these people that were working ended up going their own ways. But then they went on with all the knowledge, with all the work that they had just done, and they made basically every other amazing sci-fi movie of the next basically since. So let me give you a quick rundown of movies that are credited to the people who came together to work on Jodorowsky's Dune. Those people went and made Alien, Superman, Terminator, Star Wars, Flash Gordon, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Guardians of the Galaxy, to name a few. And I've been thinking a lot. I've been thinking a lot actually about how, there have been a lot of layoffs in the outdoor industry. There have been a lot of layoffs just in general of people, across all like tech and everything else. And I think about this idea of Jodorowsky's Dune, where you had all these incredible people working together, and then they something implodes, and then they go off and do the next amazing thing. One example that I'm thinking about, if you follow Jordan Rogers, this guy who used to work at Nike. This is
You
one
turned me onto this
person
guy. Yeah.
one person working together with people at Nike, leaves Nike, and now he's doing such incredible work. I've been seeing a lot more stuff of him popped up, partnering with other people and all these things. But this idea of like the Alien, Dune, Star Wars, that's good, that level of stuff that's going to come out from sort of this sort of tech implosion. I'm so excited to see
I was wondering
what.
where you were going with this. Okay, I
Huh?
get it now. Basically, what you're saying is that the things that are happening in the industry are people who have potentially been laid off. There are empires that will be built by those individuals. Is basically what you're getting at. Is that right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. And if you want to get okay, I went way down the rabbit hole here, but there's actually a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune that has a 98% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So if you want to go into the sci-fi thing that I'm getting weird about, like go check that out. But yeah, I think there's so many empires that are about to be built as a result of the last year or so of all these people who were working together, were learning a ton from each other, and are banding together to go make incredible things. Maybe like this podcast, but there are so many other examples that are out there of people banding together to make new things happen. And I'm so fired up to see what this is going to turn into be.
Hell yeah. What a curveball for your BPC this week. If you are in the process of building an empire and you're listening to this show, drop us a DM on Instagram. We would love to hear about it and feature it on the show. Secondnature.media on Instagram. You can also find us at secondnature.media on the regular internet. Sign up for our newsletter there. It's going to be in your inbox by the time you listen to this, in all likelihood, this week. And we would love it if you enjoy the content in audio or in written format to forward it to your friends. We're just getting started here at Second Nature, but we're having a lot of fun doing it, and we appreciate our early listeners and our early fans. Anything you want to say before we close down here, Aaron?
I'm good. That's the pod.
That's the
Amazing. Like
pod. Cool. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week.